Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're putting the English education system under the microscope. By the end of 2025, it's really facing a perfect storm of crises, and we're going to break down exactly what that means for students, for teachers, and, well, for the future of learning itself.
So let's just start with a number. One that pretty much sets the stage for everything else we're about to cover. That number is 172,000. That's the record number of children, kids, living homeless in temporary accommodation in England right now. Just let that sink in.
And look, this isn't just some abstract housing crisis. It's an education crisis. It's seeping into classrooms, and it's revealing these deep, systemic strains on schools, starting with the most fundamental issue of all: money.
So where does this pressure test really begin? Well, you guessed it, with the money. The financial strain on schools right now is just immense, and it's hitting the most vulnerable students the absolute hardest.
Right at the heart of this whole money crisis is what's known as the SEND deficit. Now, that's a massive £14 billion funding gap for special education. Think of it like a black hole, and it is forcing some incredibly difficult and, let's be honest, very controversial decisions. And this right here reveals a fundamental tension in government policy. On one hand, you've got a £3 billion investment to support students with special needs in mainstream schools. But on the other, there's this growing fear that this is all coming at the expense of specialized schools that are already at a breaking point. It's a real tug of war.
And this quote just brilliantly illustrates that fear on the ground. You can almost hear the frustration from this special school leader. They're basically warning that their schools are being pushed to the absolute brink.
Now, just to make a tough situation even tougher, there's this huge demographic shift happening in the background. Forecasts are suggesting there will be 400,000 fewer pupils in the entire system by 2030.
So this raises a really critical question, right? Because school funding in England is so heavily tied to the number of kids in seats, falling pupil numbers create this massive financial shock. And you know who it hits the hardest? Schools in disadvantaged areas, because they're often the ones with the most empty desks to begin with.
But this financial pressure, it isn't just some abstract problem on a spreadsheet. It has a very, very real human cost. So let's zoom in now and look at the people at the very heart of the education system: the students and the staff.
Just take a look at these attendance figures. I mean, they tell such a powerful story. Absence is up pretty much across the board, but students in special schools have an absence rate of almost 15%. That's more than double what you see in primary schools. It just highlights their extreme vulnerability.
And remember that opening number? That 172,000 homeless children? Well, this is the human cost. An incredible 92% of teachers say that these students show up to school exhausted. They struggle in exams, they miss school days, and they're basically being robbed of a fair shot at learning.
For teachers, the whole nature of their job has fundamentally changed. It's no longer just about planning and marking papers. Now, the biggest pressures are coming from managing really complex student behavior, safeguarding, just chasing attendance, and dealing with all those unmet special educational needs.
And all of this immense pressure is leading to a retention crisis that's been described as dire. A quarter of new teachers quit within 3 years. And it's not just the new folks. Experienced head teachers are also walking away. This is the direct result of asking staff to plug all the gaps left by funding cuts and these bigger societal problems.
So with all these external pressures, it's really easy to lose sight of what's actually happening inside the classroom. So let's shift our focus there for a minute and look at the curriculum and the growing role of technology.
Okay, first, a major policy change. The English Baccalaureate, you might know it as the EBAC, has been scrapped. This was a performance measure that really prioritized a narrow set of academic subjects, and it got a ton of criticism for pushing creative arts way out to the margins.
So, the logical next step would be a huge comeback for art, music, and drama in schools, right? A renaissance of creativity?
Well, not exactly. The reality is, a recent survey shows that only 7% of school leaders plan to increase time on creative subjects. And why is that? Well, they point to a crowded curriculum, those funding cuts we've been talking about, and a critical shortage of specialist arts teachers.
Meanwhile, you've got technology, which is throwing both opportunities and challenges into the mix. Some head teachers are actually embracing AI as a tool to empower parents, helping them to voice their concerns a lot more effectively.
But the National Education Union is offering a really stark warning. They argue that if AI is just rolled out without teachers being directly involved, it risks just amplifying the existing problems in the system and could potentially lead to what they're calling cognitive decline. It's a serious concern.
You know, the pressures on the education system don't just come from inside. So let's take a step back and look at the external forces at play here. Everything from what parents are worried about to big shifts in international policy.
This is fascinating. A huge survey of over 6,000 parents shows they are keenly aware of the funding crisis we talked about. For nearly half of them, it's the single biggest issue schools are facing. And what's really interesting is they're not just obsessed with exam results. A majority believe the main role of school is to build life skills and broaden kids' horizons.
And if we look abroad for a moment, a huge policy shift is on the horizon. In 2027, the UK is set to rejoin the Erasmus Plus program. Now, this is going to reopen a ton of study and work opportunities abroad for students, for apprentices, learners of all ages, basically replacing the touring scheme that came in after Brexit.
So when you put all of this data together, from the funding black holes and the teacher burnout to the promise and the peril of AI, it really paints a picture of a system at a critical crossroads. It is facing immense pressure from every single direction, which leaves us with one final crucial question to think about. Is the system, as it's currently designed, truly built to last?